Hello everyone, my name is Mateusz Benedek and I'm an assistant professor here at the Faculty of Law Administration and Economics, and I'm also General Director of Misesa Institute of Economic Education, and we are very happy to host today Professor Bryan Caplan of George Mason University, economist and author of many great books, several of which are translated into Polish.
Well, all official books.
Okay, but not this collection of essays.
Yes, not the essay collections.
I encourage you to listen to this talk and then consider the idea of buying some of these books and getting an autograph. You will not regret this decision, I may assure you. So, without further ado, Professor, please tell us more about education.
All right. All right, thank you very much, Mateusz, for setting this up and for accepting my terrible Polish pronunciation. I'm going to sit because my feet are tired from touring beautiful Wrocław. Am I saying that okay? Wrocław? Right, but my mind is at full energy, so don't worry. All right, so this book has been translated into Polish. Notice the subtitle. It's Why the Education System is a Waste of Time and Money. People often misinterpret this as saying that education is a bad deal for the individual student. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it is a bad use of taxpayer money, and here is why. Let's just start with what I say is the normal view of education in the United States. In Czechia, they agreed it was the normal view in Czechia, so now you can tell me if it's the normal view in Poland. And here's the normal view. We need more and better education. Right, do you ever have a Polish politician who makes a speech and says, we need worse and less education? All right, does anyone ever say that when they want to win office?
Except for women.
Yes, well, do they want to win office? They just want to speak truths. All right, so anyway, I have never gone to a country where people deny this was the normal view. It's also unusual because economists and the public on this issue agree. On so many other issues, economists and the public disagree, which is what this book is about. All right. So, for example, on free trade, economists will say free trade is good, the public will say that it's bad. But on education, this is one where the public will say, oh, we need more and better education, and economists will say, yes, I agree completely, we need to invest more in education. All right, now, why do economists think this? Primarily, there are thousands of papers that measure the rate of return to education. These are papers where you try to measure the investment value of education just like you would measure the investment value of anything else. And almost all these papers discover that the return to education is pretty high. It's especially high in the United States, actually. Lowest country in the world is probably Denmark. I assume Poland is somewhere in between the highest and the lowest. In fact, logically, it must be so, right? But in any case, most economists, when they look at these thousands of papers finding a large rate of return for education, say, this is the proof that education builds human capital. How do you say human capital in Polish? All right, capital ludzki? All right, close enough? Close enough. Sounds a lot like Ruski. Rudzki and Ruski are almost the same word. Right, forget about it. Anyway. All right. This is a phrase that I believe, it was popularized by Gary Becker. You've probably heard of him. And the idea is that school is like a factory for human capital. In a regular factory, we take raw materials and we turn it into a tractor. In school, we take human raw materials and we turn it into a computer programmer. In goes the low-value raw material, out comes the incredible product of our advanced technological civilization. This all sounds very plausible, and it's something that I heard from the earliest age. I can't remember an age when I had not heard this story. I also can't remember an age when I didn't find it puzzling. Right, most of these ideas, I was an adult, but this one, this is something I've been thinking about since I was 5 years old. because I just looked around in the classroom. I said, something's not right. Something is mysterious. There's something you're not explaining very well. All right, and this was the puzzle that I've noticed from a very young age, and perhaps you have noticed it also. When you actually experience education, is there anyone here who has not spent at least 10 years in a classroom? All right, sometimes someone brings a child and then, all right, but everyone here, you've all been in a classroom for at least 10 years, right? So you have a lot of first-hand experience with education. Now, have you ever noticed that most classrooms are not teaching any practical job skills at all? Most classrooms are teaching you things you will never need to know once you're done with the exams, unless you become a teacher of that subject. Why do you need to know history? To become a history teacher. Why else? It's really barely any other practical reason to learn it. Right now, in the US, our education is probably even more useless than your education, right? Because in the United States, we study foreign languages that we never actually speak, ever, right? Americans study French. They really do. Spanish is more common, but Americans study French. When will an American ever need to know French? All right, now you guys, you learn English in school, and you seem to be using it right now, right? Hopefully. Hopefully. I've also heard, like, how much of your English did you really learn in school versus from TV or from talking to your friends? Like how much of your English did you really acquire in school? Half? Less? 10%? All right, so most of it you acquire from using it, but still, at least the foreign language you study is a practical language that you will use one day later. Do you have to do a third language in school?
Yeah. Sometimes there is German or Russian.
So you have to do German? Yes. Yes. Yeah. Wie viele Leute kann hier Deutsch sprechen? Ja. Eine Person? Gibt es mehr? Nein? Yes. Yes. Ah, ein mehr. Sehr gut. Aber, all right. And you used to have to learn Russian. Do they still teach any Russian in school? No? No.
In the neighboring class, there was Russian class. They were taught Russian.
All right. But in any case, so U.S. education is even more useless than yours, but you still have the feeling of uselessness. All right, so knowledge of history. Are there a lot of jobs for historians? Do you have a history-based economy? Are there history factories where thousands of historians work producing more history? Probably not. Just higher mathematics. Even people that learn calculus usually do not use it on the job in the United States. Here, if you're teaching intermediate microeconomics, you'll use calculus. All right, but most people learn higher mathematics and then don't use it. Music and art. Are music and art required in Polish schools?
Unfortunately.
Yes. Yes, so it's extreme in American schools. My sons when they were in fourth grade, their school required 3 music classes, mandatory music classes. There was chorus, music appreciation, and dance. And I called up the vice principal and said, my sons hate dancing. Could they just go to the library instead? He says, nope, sorry, our rules require all students to dance. All must dance. All right, Shakespeare. So this is English that was spoken 500 years ago. This is generally required in American schools. Is there any very old Polish author you have to read and you don't understand it because the language is so old-fashioned, right?
Like, that's the norm, probably.
What you said, what you said. All right. Sorry? Polish is? Oh, it's more consistent over time. Well, let's see. I was just reading the Wikipedia article on Slavic languages. So there was an Old Polish, but you don't have to read Old Polish. Yes, 1,000 years ago. See, yes. Yeah. In college, they may make you read Chaucer in America. That's almost 1,000 years ago. All right, so foreign languages are especially ridiculous in the United States. And actually, Latin. Do you anyone here have to learn Latin in school? Yes, in gymnasium? All right, so in the United States, Latin almost died, and then it came back. And now there are a lot of students learning Latin again, just in case you find a time machine and you go back to ancient Rome, and then you'll be ready. All right. In American schools, there's often a bad student in the back of the class who asks a good question. The question is, what does this have to do with real life? When am I going to need to know this? I remember my trigonometry teacher saying, can't believe you would ask such a stupid question. All right, well, have you seen? Is trigonometry really important in your life now? All right, now, what is so strange about this? You might say, this isn't so strange. School is run by the government. Government wastes taxpayer money all the time. Why is it surprising they waste taxpayer money on Latin? But there's something that is more strange about what's going on in school than what goes on in the rest of the government. What's strange is that the private sector cares. Profit-maximizing employers care about your performance in public school, even though you study subjects that you don't really need to know on the job. You may be unable to get a job in a bank because you failed Latin. You say, do we serve Latin-speaking customers? Like, why? But you don't even get a chance to say that because your application was thrown in the trash. Thrown in the trash. Yeah, I don't need that. All right, your application is thrown in the trash because you failed Latin. So this is the real puzzle. Government wasting money is not that strange. It's normal, actually. But like, why is it that on the train system in Europe you have to get a ticket and a reservation? I've been suffering with that. I was just at the back of the train station suffering. I couldn't do it online. Do you know that there are countries where you can just get a ticket, which is also your reservation? It's one piece of paper that serves both functions. Anyway, but here you need a ticket and a reservation. All right, but that's typical of government, just government inefficiency. But it's strange the private sector cares about a bad decision that the government makes. Employers are paying a lot of extra money to people who study subjects that they don't seem to need to know on the job. All right, so how can this be? There is a long-standing economic theory called signaling that explains all these facts. Michael Spence, economist, won a Nobel Prize for it. There's also about 5 other Nobel Prize winners in economics who wrote about this model. So Ken Arrow worked on it, Edmund Phelps, even Paul Krugman has a paper related to signaling. What is the idea of signaling? It says, look, all right, some education is what people think it is. You learn a skill. You'll learn how to read. You need to learn how to read in school. You need to read on the job. It makes sense. You learn how to write in school. You write on the job. It makes sense. You need how to do arithmetic. You learn how to do arithmetic in school. You need it on the job. That makes sense. What signaling says is there's a lot of other education that is like jumping through a hoop. You're like jumping through a hoop. It's in the Olympics. You jump through and you go, ta-da, look at me. Right, I know this isn't Romania, so do you know Nadia Comaneci, famous gymnast? All right, so you just show off. You just do something hard that is not actually by itself important or interesting, but this is a way to convince observers that you have good skills, that you are highly trainable, highly employable. We have this expression, to show off. Do you say to show off in Polish? How do you say to show off? Say it louder. All right, so show off. Hey, Mom, look at me. I can ride my bike with no hands. All right, to show off. What are you trying to show off in school? Probably a lot of things. You're trying to show off your brains. I'm very smart. But also your work ethic. I'm very hardworking. Then finally, your conformity. I will show up on time, sit still, take notes, take a test, do what I'm told. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Signaling models all have the following assumptions. First, there have to be some hard-to-observe differences between human beings. Right? You can't just go and ask a person, hey, are you a good worker? And you go, oh, yes, I'm great. Fine, you're hired. Right? Employers can't do that because they can't know whether or not you're telling the truth. Almost everyone is going to say they're a great worker, right? Do you guys watch The Simpsons? Simpsons in Polish? All right, there's an episode where Homer is asked for a job. So what is your greatest weakness as a worker? The other competitors say, oh, workaholic, perfectionist. And Homer says, well, I'm kind of stupid, I'm lazy, I get angry at customers, I leave work in the middle of the day for no reason. All right, but the answers you're supposed to give are workaholic and perfectionist, of course. All right, but it's hard to know. Most people will not just admit that they're a bad worker like Homer did. Secondly, you need the differences to correlate with something that is observable, like grades or diplomas. So it just needs to be the case that on average, people who do better in school are better workers. So that if you do well in school, this is a sign that you are likely to be a good worker as well. It doesn't have to be perfect because a business is not a logic class. No one running a business says, well, what is the absolute proof that this business will make money? Because guess what? There is no absolute proof that any business will make money. Even businesses that seem like they're great, sometimes they just burn down and there's a problem, so things like that. Then finally, for this to be economically stable, you need the higher productivity workers to have lower costs of doing the observable thing. That lower cost could be in time or money or just pain. It doesn't matter what it is exactly. People often think that, well, it's not like we charge more money to people that are worse students, but actually, at least in the United States, we do, because we have a 4-year degree system for college. See, in Poland, what is it, 3 years for college or 4?
3 years.
3 years. And then 1 more year to get a master's? All right, so in the 2 more years. So in the United States, it's 4 years to get a bachelor's degree, but most students do not finish a 4-year degree in 4 years. Only 35% finish a 4-year degree in 4 years. It takes about 5 years for 55% to finish. In 6 years, it's 60%. And then, yes, it tapers off. It doesn't go up much more than that. And do you think that if you take too long to finish, then we stop charging you money? No. We charge you or your parents money every year it takes you. And so if you were a good student, you finish on time, or maybe even finish early, you pay less in tuition to go to college in America than you would if you were a bad student. And then, of course, there's also the time. You're not making money on the job when you're going to school. And then there's just the pain of always being told, you're bad, your work is bad. In the US, we now don't tell students they're bad. We say, needs improvement, but needs improvement equals you are bad. All right. And after 17 years of being told you need improvement, probably you can figure out that it's not just needing improvement, that people think you're bad. The important thing about signaling models is in signaling models, the market pays you for showing off, even if the display itself is wasteful. Why does it pay you? Because it's a way to convince employers that you're worthwhile. Right? The way I like to explain it is this. In the regular human capital story, education is job training. In the signaling model, education is a passport to the real training. And where does the real training happen? On the job. It's on the job that you actually learn how to do your work. My view is not the normal view among education or labor economists. What is funny, actually, is that most economists do agree with me, but the economists that specialize in the subject disagree. So it's like, well, I have people that know a medium amount on my side, but the people who know the most think I'm wrong. So that's kind of awkward, right? The people that know the most generally disagree. So anyway, I'm not claiming this is the normal view. I wrote this book because it is not the normal view. I wrote this book because no one else was saying this. You may say, well, wait, what about those Nobel Prizes? The answer is that the people that won their Nobel Prizes for working on this idea got it for pure theory. This book says it's actually true in the real world. This is something that almost none of the other people that worked on it ever actually said. So Michael Spence got a Nobel Prize, but did he say this model is true? No, the model is interesting. Ken Arrow, if you read his essays on this, it kind of sounds like maybe he believes it, but he definitely does not say, this is true. This is the book that says, yes, this is true. At least it is a very large share of the truth. So anyway, so I'm being honest with you. I'm saying this is not the popular view. I have a minority position, and now I'm going to try to convince you to agree with me against all of them. They're wrong. There's a lot of them, but they're all wrong, and I'm right. All right. So why should you agree with me and not them? See, look, the very strongest reason is just to look at what we are teaching in school. Look at curricula. Look at what is actually required for students to learn, and then just ask yourself, when are you really going to learn this in real life? When will you use this in real life? All right, so I have good data for the US. So first of all, in the US, we have data on what students do with their time in high school. All right, what we can say is that only 30% of all American high school time is spent on English and math. We spend over 40% on arts, foreign language, history, social studies, things like that. So we spend more time on stuff that you almost certainly never use in real life than on stuff that you are very likely to use in real life. All right, we can also look at college majors of American college students, and what we can see when we go through the list of majors, less than 25% have a major that you could even pretend is vocational. You know, what is the standard? Say the standard is, can you say the major and not laugh when you say it's vocational? So electrical engineering passes the laugh test. Computer science, software engineering. All right, and then we've got dance theory. All right. Agricultural economics. All right, but communications. Yes, we turn out more communications majors every year in America than the total number of jobs in all print, television, internet, radio, media. Most of those people could never work in communications. Engineers, economists love to bring up engineers when I talk about this work, are about 5% of all college graduates, 1 in 20. So vast majority are doing majors that are not plausibly vocational. Now, another sign of how useless the education is. We look at what adults actually know. This is harder than it seems because normally we measure learning of students at the end of a school year. Is there like a standardized Polish graduation exam or anything like that? All right, but you give that to students when they're done with school, right? You don't give it to someone when they're 40 and say, let's find out how much stuff you know, right? You give it to children, right? Old children, but still children. All right. This is a problem because psychologists have made an amazing discovery about human beings. Human beings forget things. Human beings forget things. People will very commonly know something well on the day of a test, and then 10 years later, they've forgotten almost all of it. Now, if you believe the human capital model of why education pays, you have to ask yourself, do employers want to pay you for things that you forgot? Does anyone want to advertise, I want to hire someone that used to know how to do engineering? It's a pretty dumb thing to advertise for. No, I want to hire someone who can do engineering now. I value workers for their actual current capabilities, not their capabilities in the past. All right. So generally, we only measure learning at the end of a class or the end of a degree, but I did find a number of tests that were given to adult Americans so we can measure how much learning do Americans actually retain. What do we find? All right, well, we're probably a bit worse than you, but don't feel too superior to us. Americans are bad, but we're not the worst in the world. We're not even close. We're about, think of the US, like when you do things like PISA tests, we're about average for first world countries. We're not the best, but we're still not terrible. All right, so what can we say? Well, first of all, there have been tests of adult literacy and numeracy finding very low levels, but still most Americans do have basic skills. About a third of American adults, you can say they really cannot read or write well at all. They're very poor, but they know the letters. There's very few Americans who don't know the letters, but to be able to do even basic things, about a third of Americans after all those years in school can't do that. I think a good rule, I say, is just take your mental picture of how much a person ought to know if they have a degree, and then go down one full degree, and then you'll be about right. So the typical American college graduate is about as good as you would think an American high school graduate is. A PhD is about what you would think a college graduate is like. High school graduate is like what you think a dropout is like. And a dropout is like someone that didn't go to school. All right, but anyway, at least for literacy and numeracy, it's measurably well above zero how much American adults know. For all the other subjects, it basically is barely greater than zero. How do we know this? Well, there are a number of tests that they gave to American adults where they basically said, let's write the 10 easiest questions we can think of for a subject. So what would that be like? Well, for a science test, that would be things like, does the Earth go around the sun or the sun go around the Earth? All right, so you got Copernicus here, right? So you got that, right? All right? All right, so thanks to Copernicus. You're solid on that? Right? That was the, like, yeah. I mean, yeah, so like it was Kepler who later went and made the math work for Copernicus, right? Isn't that right? Yes, Copernicus didn't have the ellipses, right? It was Kepler who had the ellipses, right? Am I correct? Yeah, I think that's right. That's correct? I was saying, so it was Kepler who figured out the ellipses of the orbits of the planets, but Copernicus just had heliocentric theory, right? When the math didn't actually work for him. He was right, but his math was actually wrong because he thought they were circles, and they weren't. Anyway, so I know a little bit more than most Americans, not that much more. All right, so anyway, so you just imagine coming with a test that easy, or a test on history. A test on history would be things like, what century was the American Civil War fought in? 21st century, 20th century, 19th century, 18th century? All right, so ask 10 questions that easy, and the typical American adult will be able to get about half right. You might say, all right, well, that's not so bad. I say it's really bad. What do we call someone who only knows half the letters in the alphabet? Yes, illiterate, not half literate, illiterate, because you cannot read. Similarly, I say if you don't know what century the American Civil War was fought in, you don't know anything about American history. You're completely confused. Same thing if you don't know like what party currently controls the American Senate, what party currently controls the American House. If you don't know that, you don't understand anything about US politics. It's not like I got half right. It's like you're just completely don't know it. And then for foreign languages, actually, I found data showing that less than 1 in 100 Americans even claims that they learn to speak a foreign language very well in school. And of course, people tend to overrate themselves, right? Right, so here too, Americans famously overrate themselves, right? We're very optimistic, right? A few of my Uber drivers thought I was strange to say hello. Say hello. I'm just being friendly. Okay. All right, so American knowledge of foreign language is bad. Obviously, your knowledge is quite a bit better. But you mostly learned it outside of school, you're saying. Okay. All right, so I say this is the first sign that I'm right and that other economists are wrong, is just how much useless education we have done. How much education you either never needed to know, or education that by the time you needed to know it, you had forgotten it. Here is the other big reason to think that I am right and other experts are wrong. Like I said, it's not puzzling that schools waste your time because they're government agencies. Government agencies waste your time all the time. What's puzzling is that the private sector cares about how you spent your time in school. All right, so this ubiquity of useless education would only be really economically puzzling if the market rewarded education poorly, but in the US, the market rewards education very well, and this is true even after making a very large number of statistical adjustments. So you guys all have done some statistics? Has everyone here done some statistics? All right, so you know how you can statistically adjust for things, right? So things like, I don't know, what would you want to adjust for? You might say, men are better basketball players than women. It's like, well, what if we adjust for height? What if we go and compare men and women of the same height? Then is there still a difference? Well, maybe there's a difference, maybe not. All right, but anyway, there's so many papers that try to make statistical adjustments for the payoff for education. A lot of them do find that the simple observed difference is overstated, but you can take all the adjustments together, and I don't know of any country where more educated people do not earn more money than less educated people, even adjusting for everything you want to adjust for. What's nice about signaling is that it's a very elegant, clean way to take two bodies of research and say they are consistent with each other. We have all this evidence from psychology and education saying that people don't learn very much that is useful. We have all this evidence from economics saying that education is very lucrative, it pays very well. Signaling allows all the evidence to be simultaneously true. Now, what are some other reasons to think that I am right and that other economists who work in this area are wrong? So this is, I'm relying upon an American comedian, Jeff Foxworthy. I don't know if you've never heard of him. His comedy is very American specific, because it's all about you might be a redneck, which is like US slang for a peasant, right? So you don't say redneck here, right? Like if you work in the sun, your neck gets red, right? You understand? All right, so anyway, that's why they're called rednecks. All right, but anyway, it says, you might be a redneck if, all right, so you might be signaling if. Following are further signs that I'm right and the normal view is wrong. You've probably heard about American college being very expensive. You've heard this, American school, really expensive. It is very expensive for foreign students. So for you guys, that's true. But if you are a US citizen, then actually it's only a very small number of people that pay a lot for college. Basically, if you choose to go to a fancy private school and your family is rich, then you'll pay a lot. All right. So I was a graduate student at Princeton. Since I was a graduate student, I also didn't pay much. But anyway, Princeton, many people consider at least one of the very best schools in the world. And officially, you have to pay about $60,000 a year to go there. So that's about $250,000 Swati. I'll keep trying if you keep correcting me. Złotych. Okay. All right, so anyway, about $250,000 of those for 1 year at Princeton. So you'll agree that's a lot of money, right? Okay. But here is the good news. You don't, and also by the way, now it is so hard to get into Princeton, the acceptance rate is now 2%. So they reject 98% of the students that apply or reject it. You can say, I'll pay everything. Doesn't matter. You still can't go. All right. So you may say, oh man, I can never go to Princeton. Actually, you can get Princeton education very easily. You don't have to apply and you don't have to pay them any money. All you have to do is move to the city of Princeton and start going to classes. As long as you look like a student, no one will ever bother you. They don't check ID. If you're compulsively honest, you could go to the professor and say, I'm not really a Princeton student, but I just want to take this class. Is that okay? And most American professors will look at you like, I'm like, you want to learn what I have to teach? This has never happened before in all my days. Of course, you're welcome to be here. That would be a normal reaction from an American professor. Okay, but there's just one problem with this plan. You save a lot of money. You get in for sure. But there's one thing you will not have at the end of 4 years of unofficial Princeton education. You will not have a diploma. There'll be no grades, no record you were ever there. Now, which would you rather have? Would you rather have that Princeton diploma and not learn anything? Or would you rather have the full knowledge of Princeton, but have no official record you were ever there? So if you even have to think about it, you agree with me, because I'm not saying that there is nothing useful that you learn in school. I'm just saying that there's a lot of signaling going on. Notice this is very different from if you were lost on a desert island. If you're on a desert island and says, look, do you want to have a degree in boat building but no knowledge of boat building? Or do you want to have knowledge of boat building but no degree? If it is you against nature, you know what you want. You want the knowledge. But when you're in the labor market, on the other hand, it's actually not clear which is better, the knowledge or the piece of paper. Another sign you might be signaling. If you've worried about failing the final exam, but you're not worried about forgetting what was on the final exam. Right? So have anyone here ever had test stress? You've been nervous about a test? I remember I was a very nervous student. I still remember before a major test, I could wipe the sweat from my hand. And you could see it. All the sweat from my hands. All right, and since being a professor, I never feel that way. All right, but anyway, has anyone ever said, oh my God, what if I forget German? Oh no. Fast wenn ich Deutsch vergessen werde. All right, so what if I forget German? All right, yeah, you're not that worried about it. Because you know, as long as you have those good grades and you have the degree, whether or not you actually speak it is probably not going to be very important. Okay, another sign you might be signaling if you don't think that cheating is only cheating yourself. This is standard teacher propaganda in America. Cheating is only cheating yourself. All right, well, is it? Well, if the human capital model is right, then that's true. Because you go to school, you put in time, maybe you put in money, and then if you cheat, you don't acquire the skills that you came to acquire. But if you're there for the signal, then cheating is not just cheating yourself. You're cheating your employer who thought he was getting a good worker. You're cheating your fellow students because now their degree is diluted by the cheating, right? No one wants to go to a school that everyone knows is full of cheaters. You want to be the one cheater at an honest school for the signal. Another sign. What is the highest grade you can get in class in Poland?
6.
What's that?
6.
A 6.
But not in the university.
Okay, what's that?
The 5.
A 5, all right. So it's either a 6 or a 5. Over in Czechia, it's a 1. A 1's the best thing. In America, the best thing you can get is an A, or sometimes an A+. All right. Our students famously seek out the easy A's. What is an easy A? An easy A is a person. It's a professor who gives A's for very little work. All right, now you might think, well, I paid good money to be here. I want a hard professor that makes me work so I acquire lots of human capital. But basically nobody says that. Instead, people look for easy graders who will give A's even if you don't really know what you're doing. Especially want an easy grader in a hard subject. I want an easy grader in advanced calculus. Perfect. That will look like I'm really smart even though I don't know what I'm doing. Here is another sign that signaling is true. Sometimes when I come to Europe or other countries, I cancel class, right? And you know what happens? This means that my students pay the same money that they would pay otherwise, and in exchange they receive less education. You might think the students would be upset, but they never are. In fact, they're happy. They're happy. I say the school will take all your money. I'm going to give you less for it. Anyone have a problem with that? No one has a problem. Actually, what I say is there anyone who will feel cheated? If there's a single student who raises their hand and says, I'll feel cheated, I will arrange for a visiting professor to do my job on the way. And no one raises their hands. And then I said, fine, I understand. You're probably embarrassed to raise your hand. Email me privately. If one student emails me, I will arrange for a guest professor. No one has ever emailed me. All right, so what's going on? What's going on, obviously, is that students want the signal, but they don't want to do the work. That's the simple answer for what is happening. Now, sometimes people just say, oh, no, it's just the students are lazy. If the student is lazy in American college, they don't need to wait for me to cancel class. They just don't show up. What the students want is a day where no one shows up, because then you don't look bad compared to other students and you don't get a worse grade. Now, there's some other signs that signaling is true. One of my favorite is we sometimes call it the sheepskin effect. So back in olden times, how old is the University of Wrocław? 300 years. So probably in those days, when you finished, they would give you a diploma that was written on the skin of a sheep. These are what ancient diplomas that's written on the skin of a sheep, right? A graduate, University of Wrocław, highly employable. All right, so that's what it said. All right, so what is the sheepskin effect? Sheepskin effect says that the payoff for the last year of school is much greater than the payoff for earlier years. This is extremely well established and a very large effect. So in the United States, about 3/4 of the payoff for college comes from graduation year, which is for us it is year 4. In countries where you graduate in year 3, guess what? Year 3 is the year where you get the big payment. You can do the year, but in the US, you can do years 1, 2, and 3, barely any payoff. Year 4, big bag of money. How can human capital explain this? It's pretty hard. What's your story? Do you save all the real human capital for the last year? You could say that. However, this does not fit with what everybody knows about American college. Our last year is what we call goof-off year. Goof-off year. It's the year to just relax and barely do any work. That's what we do for both high school and college. Last year's goof-off year, you don't really work hard. That's the normal. But that's the year that pays a lot. Very hard for human capital to explain this. Signaling has a much better explanation, especially if you remember what I was telling you. that one of the main things we are signaling in school, oh, it won't let me. Let's see, no, it won't let me. All right, but conformity, conformity. Why is conformity important? Because if your society says you have to do a 4-year degree, what does a conformist person do? 4 years. If your society says 3 years, 3 years. If your society says that you have to go and study Shakespeare and general education before becoming a doctor, great. That's America, by the way. In America, you have to get a full undergraduate degree first, 4 years, much of that time spent studying stuff that has nothing to do with medicine, then you get to go to medical school. In the United Kingdom, you just go straight from high school to medical school. Do you have the less crazy system here? Can you go from high school to medical school? All right, so hail Poland. All right, the US system is so insane. No, you can't start studying medicine right after high school. You have to first read more Shakespeare. You have to, it's like, why? Because, to conform, that's why. And yes, do you think we let people become doctors who just skip this and say, it's stupid, I'm just going to go straight to medical school? No, you can never become a doctor in America if you try to do that. All right, so the sheepskin effect is very hard for the human capital theory to explain. It makes a lot of sense if you think about it as signaling conformity. And then whatever your society says is the correct number of years, you do that, and then you get your big payoff at the very end. Another sign that I'm right and that other economists are wrong, in macroeconomics, there's been a lot of work on how can we make countries rich. And one of the favorite answers is we'll make them rich with education. We'll send them foreign aid to go and help them build schools, and those schools will then go and create human capital, and that will enrich the country. The problem is there's decades of statistics saying the effect of that seems to be really small, maybe zero. Definitely much smaller than the effect of sending one person to school. Human capital, it's very hard to explain this. Because, well, if giving one person skills makes that person richer, then giving the whole country skills should make the whole country richer. On the other hand, if what we're doing is giving you stamps on your forehead, well, giving one person good stamps on their forehead makes them richer. If everybody has good stamps on their forehead, what do you accomplish? Well, employers just say, you need to have more stamps, or I will throw your application in the trash. In the trash. All right. So what is wrong with signaling? Right, so who really cares if education builds human capital or just signals it? The answer is, from the point of view of an individual, it really does not matter. From the point of view of one student, all you need to know is, to get the job I want, I have to do this thing. I have to get this degree. Maybe I'm getting skills, maybe I'm going and impressing people, who knows? But from the point of view of policy making, it matters enormously. It is a massive difference. Because, like I was saying, if education builds human capital, a country can get rich by investing in its people. It is a good strategy. On the other hand, if signaling is rich, it is not real investment. All you're doing is putting on more stamps on the foreheads of your people. And if everyone has good stamps, then no one does. All right, so there's an analogy that we sometimes make with a concert. Suppose we're all sitting down at a concert and one person wants to see better. What can one person do? Stand out, stand up. Stehen Sie auf! Auf Deutsch. All right, but suppose we all want to see better. Can we all stand up and all see better? No. The signaling model says the same goes for education. It says that if everybody gets a lot more education, then what we'll have is not economic growth. What we'll get is credential inflation. Credential inflation. So how bad has inflation in Poland been for the last 3 years? Pretty low? Okay, so in Czechia they said it was even worse than the euro. It was bad. It was like as bad as the euro? Mm-hmm. So wait, repeat? Oh, so okay, so all right. So you did worse. So then who's bad? You said it wasn't that bad? It sounds like you had terrible inflation. It was 40% as bad, or was 40% higher?
14. No, 40 like during 3 years. The highest point year-over-year trend was, I think, 80.
Okay, so that's pretty bad. Yeah, it's worse than us. This is the worst inflation I can remember. It was even higher when I was a little boy, but all I remember then is my parents complaining. But I didn't notice. All right, so we have the general idea of inflation, right? And the basic idea of inflation is this. Suppose that I go and I print a billion, what? Oh, fine, a billion Z, and I give it to one person. Are you rich now? If I give you, yes, you're rich. If I print a billion for each person in Poland, give each person a billion, are you all rich? Of course not. Just prices will go to an incredible heights, and that will be the problem. You guys had much worse inflation in the early 90s, right? Yes, so maybe are you comparing it to that? Is that why you say it wasn't so bad? So did you actually have like 100% inflation in the early 90s in any year? Okay, so you're like, all right, now I understand why you didn't think it was that bad. Yeah.
Nobody said that it wasn't that bad. Everybody said, yeah, it's pretty bad.
Yes, right. So anyway, that's the idea of regular inflation. The idea of credential inflation is basically the same. If one person gets a degree, is it good for that one person? Sure. But if everyone in Poland gets a great degree, does this mean everyone in Poland can get a great job? Of course not. All right, so that is the heart of the signaling model. It's what the signaling model says is bad about signaling. It says that you go and when government encourages education, you're encouraging a wasteful competition. It's a competition where you burn up time, you burn up taxpayer resources, but in the end, you don't really build skills, or at least not much. All right, now, if you take a look at my books, I only write controversial books. Exclusively. I do not write books on anything that is not controversial. I do have some normal views. I believe the sky is blue, just like a lot of other people. But I'm never going to write a book called The Sky is Blue, because what's the point, right? It's not very interesting to me. The book's been written 100 times, so you don't need me to do it. I write books on controversial views that other people are going to disagree with. What's funny is that this book, I can give this talk to an audience of normal, average Americans. And until this point, everyone is agreeing with me. People are nodding. Yes, yes, that's exactly what I saw during my 17 years in school. Just the way it is, absolutely. You know, people even will say, do you really need to be a professor to understand this stuff? And then I say, okay, now here's the first big policy implication. Drastically cut education spending. And this is where the normal audience goes, no, that's terrible. You'll destroy our human capital. And you're like, oh, we can't do it. And I'm like, you've been agreeing with me up till now. You've been nodding every time I said it's pointless and wasteful and ridiculous and that this fits your own experience. You were nodding with me about all the arguments. And now I tell you, stop wasting the money on the thing that you agree is wasteful, and you say, no, don't. That doesn't make sense. All right, so the policy recommendation, the main one in this book is austerity, which I know is normally a negative term that people who want to defend government spending will use and say, these terrible austerity policies. But I think it's a good word. To me, austerity is what happened in the 1980s when I would go to my father and say, hey, Dad, can I have $20? And what did my dad say? He'd say, what do you need $20 for? Also, what happened to the last $20? What do you know? And what good did it accomplish? Right? These are all questions, and these are good questions. Anyone who is in charge of taxpayer money should be like my dad in the 1980s. Of course. Because it's the easiest thing in the world to say, take all you want if it's not your money. But a proper protector of taxpayer interests is there saying, I want proof that this is a good use of taxpayer money. Now, the usual reaction people have is, why do we have to cut the spending instead of just finding something better to spend it on? I've got a lot of arguments about this. Here's the first one. Cutting spending is really easy. It doesn't require a lot of brains. It doesn't require a lot of thought. You just agree, this is wasteful, and then no more this. All right, on the other hand, coming up with a good way to spend taxpayer money is very hard. It requires a lot of thought. It requires experimentation and testing. So, once you agree that some taxpayer spending is wasteful, why wait until you accomplish this much harder task of finding a good way to spend it? Why not just stop wasting immediately and then say, if we ever find a good way to spend it, we'll have the money there. You can be like Norway with your giant sovereign wealth fund. It's like we're sitting on the money. We're sitting on this money until we find something worthwhile. Or we could just not tax as much. We could do this too. All right, another way I like to think about it is this. Suppose someone is taking a fake cure for COVID, and you have proof that it's a fake cure, and you show it to them, and they say, well, what does cure it? Like, I don't know what cures it. But what I do know is you're wasting your money on a fake cure. Well, I'm going to keep spending money on the fake cure until you come up with the right way of fixing it. What can you do with a person like this? Now, in the context of education, a big question for me is the problem that education just can't be improved? Or is it just that we know how to improve it, but the system is broken? Right? Because there's a lot of people in American education who are sit around thinking about ways to improve education, trying to find what works and what doesn't. So to say that it works poorly either says it can't be fixed, or to say that the system is broken and doesn't listen to good research. My general view is actually that the real problem is the system doesn't listen. In writing this book, I found a lot of pedagogical techniques that are much more effective than what we use. For example, for foreign language education, there is only one correct way to teach foreign language, and that is the immersion method. Man kann hier kein Englisch sprechen, nein! That's how so you'll notice my German is at least okay. I took it in college, and at my college they had a full immersion philosophy. On day one of German 1, they will yell at you for speaking English. Nein! Nein! And you're like, but I don't, nein! And you're like, okay. And then you're thinking, what words do I know now? I've learned 3 words. Ich heiße Bryan. Okay! That's okay. All right, so there are much better ways of teaching foreign languages. They are used in basically 0 high schools in America. What do they do in America? They do the terrible methods that don't work. They do the things where they say, all right, now we're going to go and learn how to say some things in German. Here's the first thing to say in German. And you say this all in English for years and years and years. That's the normal way. The last day of my high school Spanish class was almost all in English. Now we're going to go and do some advanced Spanish together. Right. There's a better way, but schools don't use it. Why not? Because it's hard and it makes students cry. Right? And the teachers don't really care about getting results. They just care about filling time. Right? And let's go and work together as a team. Let's all help each other. Everyone is special. So that's the kind of attitude they have, and that's why it doesn't work. Since I wrote this book, people have said, don't you have anything good to say about education? And I'll say, yes. American teachers are very, very nice. That's what I have to say that is good. They're very nice people, especially the ones that teach little kids. They're really nice. I've seen it. I don't deny it. But they are not logical. They're not results-oriented. They're not can-do. Right? They don't really care whether anything actually gets accomplished as long as everyone is happy. All right, so that's why it is so hard to reform the system, is you would have to go and replace almost all the teachers who are very nice but don't care about results with people who are like this. All right. Are Polish teachers better? Are Polish teachers nice, or are they like this? It depends. It depends. Yeah. How about
compared to other bureaucrats, definitely most teachers are better.
There they are. Yes.
Organizations, usually people are very rude.
They're very rude.
But
right.
Teachers, sometimes they are rude.
Right. Well, I'm saying often you have to be mean to be a good teacher. You have to be hard, because if you're too nice, people don't learn. All right, so this is the major policy implication. This is the one that almost everybody hates, and this is why I wrote the book, because that's still what should be done. We need drastic cuts in education. We are wasting a pile of money. What will happen to all the people now in school? My answer is they will get jobs at younger ages, and then they will begin learning how to do their job several years early, because remember, education is not mostly job training. It is a passport to the real training, which happens on the job. So let's stamp all the passports and get people to their final destination immediately. Now, the minor policy implication is much more popular in every country, including America. Does it make education more vocational? So do you guys have like the German system where you have technical school and gymnasium, And then a lot of kids are learning how to work in a factory or to do woodworking or carpenter or something like that.
We do, but very few people decide to do that because it's considered to be like a lower class
Right.
citizen.
But of course, there's still a lot of jobs like that, right? So then you go to college and then you become a bricklayer after that. So yeah, I mean, I know the Germans are moving away from the German system. Only the Swiss really believe it, from what I can tell. Anyway, say, like, the Swiss system is a much better system. America is especially bad here because the kinds of kids that would go into technical school in Europe usually just drop out of school and become criminals in America. And this is not really an exaggeration. So about 2/3 of all people in American prisons are high school dropouts. And why do they drop out of high school? Well, so the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation did a study of high school dropouts in America, and they spent millions of dollars, like $20 million. Why do people drop out of high school? And they discovered the amazing answer. They drop out because they are bored and don't like school. Wow. All right. What is vocational education? At least a lot of people who find school boring and don't like it like technical education much better. So it's a way to keep them in school and give them useful skills. Why does the US do so little of it? Mostly because Americans, it violates our sense of equality. So you're saying this kid who has failed math for 10 years in a row will never be president or a physicist? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's super unlikely. And why don't we go and find something that is a likely fit? Oh, so you think he should just be a failure? Well, I think what's going to happen if he doesn't do this is he'll end up in prison. So I think it'd be much better if he just did an apprenticeship at McDonald's than if he stayed in the regular program. But anyway, so say there's good evidence that's moderately better for the student to do vocational education, especially those that do not like regular school. And it's vastly better for taxpayers because it is such a good way of keeping people out of prison. This is especially in the US, because you've heard we have a lot of people in prison. Assume you've got less than us, right? Yes, so it's fun. We let out a lot of people during COVID, actually. So hundreds of thousands of criminals were released during COVID. Some innocent, some not so innocent. All right, last point. Last point. So we got questions. Yeah. All right. Oh, yeah. All right. The humanist critique. All right. There are a lot of people that have reviewed my book who are not economists, not social scientists. They're humanities professors. So they're professors of English or history. And when a humanities professor reviews my book, usually what they say is, fine, Caplan is right about the economics, but he is a terrible caveman. He doesn't appreciate that the real point of education is not there to get you a better job, although all educational propaganda says that it is. Education is there to uplift the human soul. All right, so, and if a Caplan was not just a caveman economist, he would know this. Now, when I read these reviews, I have the following reaction. I can understand reviewing a book you haven't read. Everybody does that, right? You can't actually read these books. But it's a really load to review a book when you don't read the table of contents. Because if you look at the table of contents, right here, we have chapter 9. Let's see. Matka karmicielka. That's terrible, isn't it? But yes, but it translates to, is education good for the soul? So if they just opened it and read that chapter title, they would know that I do talk about this issue. And actually what I say is, I'm not a caveman. I really love ideas and culture. One of the main things I do in Europe is see operas. I tried to get here in time to go and see Don Giovanni last night at the Wrocław Opera, but our train got in too late and we had to have dinner and it was my anniversary, so I didn't get it. And my wife didn't want to see it, so I didn't get to see it. But I've been seeing operas all over Europe because we don't have very good opera. We don't have much opera in the United States. So yeah, I love this stuff. I love talking about ideas, right? Like I didn't become an investment banker for a reason. I would hate to become an investment banker. I want to just live with ideas. But what I do say is this. We should not give school credit just for good intentions. If a school says, I'm going to go and uplift the human soul, I'm going to turn people into lovers of Goethe and Schiller and Shakespeare, right? My reaction is, all right, so prove that you succeed. What do you mean prove that you succeed? Well, how about let's start easy. Show me that people that were forced to study these subjects consume it a lot. It's correlational, but I'll still accept that. It's like, well, we can't prove that because it's not true, because almost zero humans voluntarily consume high culture. If you go to European operas, you'll notice they're really old there. You guys are not at the opera. This is why we have these incredibly cheap student tickets at the best opera houses in Europe, because they're desperately trying to get someone under the age of 50 to go. Right? And did they try to make you to love opera in school? Was there ever a point where they tried to make you appreciate it and say how great it is, it's our heritage? No, they didn't bother. All right. No. But, yeah. High literature? High literature? Yeah. Yes, yeah. But hardly anybody cares. All right, so what I say is, look, if actual education successfully made people into connoisseurs of the arts, culture, ideas, then I'd say, all right, that's a pretty good argument against my view. But actual schools don't do that, because actual schools, first of all, the teachers are generally very boring and uninspiring. And secondly, this is what's really depressing, when there is a teacher that is inspiring and fascinating, normally the students still find them boring. So you guys know who Steven Pinker is, famous Harvard psychologist? He teaches at Harvard, he gets prizes for the best professor at Harvard, and he wrote an essay saying, only about half my students show up to class. You can have the brightest students in the country, taught by the best professor at the best school in the world, supposedly, and half of them don't even bother to show up. Why? Because most human beings, no matter how smart they are, find ideas and culture incredibly boring. And you cannot change their mind in any way whatsoever, which is a depressing thought, I think. I remember when I was in high school, I started loving this kind of stuff. My dad is very smart. He's got a PhD in electrical engineering. But I tried to get him to listen to opera, and he's like, ah! Right, he just wanted to watch baseball. That was what he liked. And the fact that he was smart enough to appreciate opera did not make him even slightly willing to try it. And this is actually most smart people. Most Americans at even the very best schools have zero interest in ideas. They do just the bare minimum to get their grades, and that's it. There's actually only one university in America where the students seem to really love ideas, and that's the University of Chicago. So that is one school where I'm amazed at how, not how smart, they're like, all the top students in the US at least used to be very smart. Used to be, because in 2020 they got rid of standardized test requirements, and now they're letting in a lot of quite stupid students. But anyway, until 2020, the students at top schools in America are very smart, but Chicago seemed to get almost all the students that actually are curious. And everyone else, they're not. And then a last point, people sometimes ask me, what about citizenship? What about going and inculcating the values of freedom and democracy, so on? Well, what we can say is that, of course, one thing you say, well, are the teachers inculcating the values of freedom and democracy? In the United States, education has gotten very woke in the last 10 years, so you might say if they are indoctrinating in something, it's bad. But in any case, there's just a lot of research saying that most teachers are just not very persuasive. They don't really change their students' minds very much. And why would teachers fail to change students' minds? Because they're boring and uninspiring. So if there's a teacher telling you, oh yeah, Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States is really good, most students are falling asleep. All right, now, another reason why this argument doesn't seem to be right is that when we go and try to figure, when education does change students' minds, why? Right, the actual evidence, which we can talk about more if you're curious, is it seems to be that the main effect is what we call a peer effect. Going to college, if it does change your mind, it's because you're around other students who also have those views. Now, the problem is that this is not actually an effective way to improve the views in the whole society, because it means that you are clustering people who agree with each other in one place. But if you cluster all the people who believe in free speech together, what does that mean about all the people that don't go to college? There you've clustered all the people who don't believe in free speech together. And so you get an opposite peer effect for other groups. So the net political effect is just not very clear. Okay, so that is the heart of my book. I'm happy to take any questions that all of you have about it. I assume that if you came here, you are curious. So don't be afraid. Ask me any question whatsoever. I'm also happy to answer questions about anything else with your permission. And I'm happy to stay as long as you want. Yes, please.
In view of the pervasive ideological deformation of American education that has become quite blatant over the last decades or so, I think it's justifiable to say that the educational system, far from providing the kind of signaling function that we are drawing on here, is actually providing an anti-signaling function. In other words, it signals to prospective employers that the university graduate is not so much a docile and conscientious and hard-working person, but actually a person detached from reality, brainwashed with neo-Marxism, identity politics, grievance studies, however you please. So it would seem to me that the actual situation is much worse than the one we are describing. It's not only the case that education is a negative externality because to waste resources on the signal that it provides is of no value, but actually it's of negative value. It should work as a repellent to every employer worthy of his name, right? So how do you interpret this process, and how do you account for this transmogrification in view of the general thesis that you are endorsing?
Emotionally, I definitely want to agree with you, because the stuff that you hate, I hate it too. But here's the important thing to understand. The graduates of top schools, with some exceptions, are still excellent workers. Top firms hire them, and they would be scared to hire people that did not go to top schools, because still, the graduates of top schools, especially if they have a degree in STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, they continue to be the very best of the best. If you're worried, well, haven't they been brainwashed to be hostile? The truth is that only a small fraction of people that get the brainwashing take it that seriously. For most, it's like going to church every day, every Sunday. Does not mean that you actually are going to practice what they teach you in church. It's the neo-Marxist church. But for most people, it's the same idea of yes, 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 of course. Yes, obviously, white supremacy, terrible. Obviously, yes, my white privilege, yes, yes, yes. Okay, now can I have a great job? That is the normal result. Now, I think you are right. If someone actually does get a major in women's studies, or if they get a major, so if that is their major, then as an employer, you should be worried. And people who get those majors, they're much more likely to end up with a public sector job. So, and that's a case where they are looking for the signal of ideological loyalty to our terrible system. But for the typical college graduate, the truth is that while they may just voice some slogans, they do not internalize them. I know. So my sons go to Vanderbilt University. This is almost a top 10 school. And what they say there is the number of students that actually are sincerely brainwashed to the point where they will lecture you at lunch, almost none. It's just a very small number of people are like that. And again, they're usually doing these strange majors that you don't want to employ. And everybody else, it's more of, yes, 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 great, white supremacy. Okay, now can we get back to me becoming a doctor, or me becoming a programmer, or me becoming an engineer? So I think that's like a big part of understanding is that employers are still shrewd and prudent to go and hire people who have very good grades from top schools as long as they have degrees in traditional majors that actually have standards. There is pressure to get rid of standards in STEM. Like I did an interview with a Princeton mathematician, Sergio Kleinerman, who escaped from communist Romania in the 70s, and now he is a dissident at Princeton trying to stand up against the administration that really does want to start making them accept mediocre mathematicians in what is the best math program in the world. And there are a few people that are saying, no, this Princeton math is for the best mathematicians on earth, and if the demographics are not diverse, then that's too bad. Right? So, but he says that, but they're under a lot of pressure from the president of Princeton and from the administration to bend the rules to get diverse demographics, so-called. But so far, they've held the line, and they are not turning out brainwashed idiots with Princeton math degrees. Now, what has happened over the last 10 years? That's, that was sort of your last question. So I've been teaching at U.S. universities now for 26 years. I've been in U.S. universities for 34 years. So I don't feel that old, but anyway. What I can say is that there was never a time things were good in American universities that I've seen. All right, so like when people say, oh, things were fine 10 years ago, they were not fine 10 years ago, they were not fine 20 years ago. They've always been messed up. They've been bad, and there's been a lot of left-wing brainwashing going on in American universities, at least since the 80s, and I think probably for decades before then. What has changed? What has changed? Two things. First of all, we have gone from a world where, for example, in economics, there would be a Democratic-Republican ratio of 3-to-1 to one where it's like 5-to-1 and more like 20-to-1 for young economists. So basically, it used to be that while there was a very strong left-wing bias, there was still a noticeable minority voice pushing back. This is especially true in economics, but in other fields, there would be maybe, the Democratic-Republican ratio might be 15-to-1. So each department might have 2 people that were dissidents. But that's 2 dissidents, but still, that's was how it would have been in the late 80s, early 90s. But it's the difference of, whereas now, actually, in many fields, you will see, in fact, 100% of sociologists being left-wing. All right, so that's one change, is that it went from there being a very large left-wing majority to being near unanimity. So that's one important change that I've seen over my lifetime. The other big one, though, is just the fanaticism. There's just a lot more people who are fanatically left-wing, and this is something that they actually think about and talk about all the time. It's their research, it's their whole way of life. There used to be more left-wing people in academia who were just like the once-a-week Catholics, who say, yeah, I'm left-wing, that's great, now let me go and work on the demographics of the 1950s. Whereas now there are just many more people who are true fanatics, who are also editing journals. So, there used to be the standard of you have to be able to publish, but if you take over the entire publication process, then you can actually do what some journals are doing now, where there's a quota for publication, there's a quota for citations. So anyway, I say that is the transformation that I've seen. As to why it's happening, in a way, the puzzle is why didn't it happen sooner? Right? Given that, if you're 80% left-wing in 1990, why did it take 30 years to become 99? That's, to me, a puzzle. In terms of why things are not getting even worse faster, you've probably heard of the American tenure system. So the US has a terrible system for hiring, but it is highly advantageous to dissidents who already have passed through the system. So the US system basically says that when you get your PhD and you want to become a professor, and we don't have the habilitazione or anything like that. Do you have the second PhD here? Oh. All right. So anyway, you do one PhD, then you can become a professor. Usually the first job you get is the best job you'll ever have. And then you try to publish as much as you can for 6 years. And then the professors decide, should you be fired or should you be given a dream job for life? That dream job for life is my slogan, but I think it's accurate. It basically means that you receive a middle-class income to do whatever you want until you die, because American professors can never be forced to retire. There's clear law on this. Do you have mandatory retirement for Polish professors? All right, so if I live to 100 years old, I can keep my job until I'm 100 years old. And that is my plan, by the way. I will never retire. They will have to... my colleague Walter Williams, he died 2 years ago. He taught his last class, he went back to his car and died. And I pray for that death. That is an incredible way to die, right? And he didn't have to grade the final exams, even better. So people said it was just like Walter. He lived a great life, he died a great death, he died the perfect death for a professor. So anyway, this dream job for life, it creates a lot of protection for dissident professors. And so far, it has almost never been broken. It has almost never been broken. You might have heard of Josh Katz at Princeton. So he was a Princeton professor who was a dissident, where they fired him, and it was obviously, the real reason was because he was a dissident, but the official reason was sleeping with a student. Why do we know that it was really because he was a dissident? Because he was punished once, and then he became a dissident, and then they decided to punish him a second time for the same thing. So obviously. So there is one other professor that might have her tenure taken away for being controversial. This is Amy Wax at the University of Pennsylvania Law School. But the truth is that almost any time you hear a story of a tenured American professor who was fired for saying or writing the wrong thing, the reality is normally they were not fired, they were given a pile of money to quit, which is not the same thing, right? Either you're fired or how much money do I have to pay you to go away? Those are two different things. So that happens quite a lot, where a dissident professor, they say, I'll give you 3-year salary if you just resign. But I will never take that deal because it's like, I'm going to live more than 3 years. And I like my job, so you can't give me 3 years salary to make me go away. Yes?
Okay, so do you think that your theory, like in text, that there are some great profit opportunities for employers to find like better recruitment schemes than just looking at the profit?
So yeah, so that is a great question. If the theory is right, then at least we should not expect there to be any special profit opportunities. There's nothing about signaling that says that there are extra profit opportunities. The main thing to remember is the status quo is incredibly subsidized by government. So the US government of all levels spends over $1 trillion a year on the current system. Now there are some states that just recently adopted voucher programs, so maybe there are some alternatives that are coming up. But basically, this is a system where the status quo is so subsidized that to compete, you would have to come up with something that was so much better for a much lower price. And then there's that final problem of conformity, right? You need to come up with a new idea that does not make employers worried that you are strange or weird or dissident or defiant. I remember about 15 years ago, I was talking to my colleague Alex Tabarrok, and he was saying, I'm getting really worried about online education destroying our jobs. And I just laughed at him. And I said, look, your son's going to be applying to college in 5 years, right? Right. What would you say if your son said, hey, Dad, I'm going to go to an online college? And Alex said, no son of mine's, yeah, exactly. And that's why our jobs are safe. It's because they are subsidized by taxpayers and the conformity signaling. People are nervous about doing a strange new thing. Now, when you go and change the way government is subsidizing it, so there are some states, so Texas and Florida now both have true voucher programs for K through 12 education. So that is opening up other possibilities. So that just started, so we'll see. But the way I think about it like this. I've had several economists say, Brian, you're wrong because the current system passes the market test. And when they say this, I'm like, it gets over $1 trillion of taxpayer money per year. That is the exact opposite of passing the market test. This is like saying that a football stadium that is paid for entirely by taxpayers passed the market test. It's ridiculous. It did not. So my general view is that signaling is very stable. There's a reason why classrooms in the 900 years ago looked a lot like this. We actually have paintings of the University of Paris. The painting looks just like this. There's a guy standing in front, he's talking, and there's people taking notes. So it does seem to be very stable. I do have some friends involved in education startups, and the big difference between a startup and a system, you can have a startup that works well for 1,000 people, and you are successful and they're happy. But to take the system we have and really change it, you need to have millions of students.
But I was thinking about if you want to find a good worker, can you find a better something to look at instead of diploma?
So far I will say it does not seem like it has worked. There are a lot of boot camps and certificate programs, but normally the way they work is you first get a regular college degree, then you also do the boot camp or certificate, and that improves things. But getting a good job with only the boot camp or only the certificate, it is possible to get sort of a medium job with that, like a job that is better than a high school job, but it is hard to go and get a really good job like that. So I've talked to people that are in computer science, and they'll say, yes, we do hire people that don't go to college who have a boot camp or a certificate, but they're sort of stuck at a worse job. And consistent with the signaling model, they'll say, look, those people have more personality problems, they don't work well with others, they don't follow orders well. So there's a reason why they didn't go to college, even though they're smart enough to learn programming, and that is they have, they're bad on their work ethic, bad on their conformity. Let's see, I think I saw one there, yes, and then I'll do you.
You've talked a lot about this book, we've probably discussed it with other people. Have you found that it's very difficult to signal conformity, honestly? So have you come across to some ideas how to, what would be alternative ways to signal conformity?
Hard to signal conformity honestly?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, if you just are naturally a conformist, it's easy to be honest. If you just like if you're really normal and you like everything everybody else likes. But, I mean, I would say, like if the dishonesty disturbs you, there are a lot of things you can do that are not really a statement at all. I mean, there are things like, don't dress like this when you do a talk, right? Yes.
What I meant was, it's hard to find a way to signal your conformity to an employer, because it's, I can of course dress in a suit, but that doesn't tell anything about how I dress normally. So it's easy for me to cheat my employer. So what would be an alternative way to?
Well, I mean, part of it is that a lot of people don't even understand what's expected of them, or they are defiant. There really are a lot of people who say, like, I'm not going to do that just to get a job. And then if you're like, oh, well, I will do that just to get a job, that's fine. But like some other ideas. These are things that require more effort and initiative, but if you've got them, great. So like I have a friend who has an education startup, and he says like a big piece of advice that he has is to go and find employers where you would like to get a job and just email, and learn about their business and try to get some ideas about improving their business. And then email them just a little bit about your idea, saying like I'm very interested in your business. I've been following your business model very closely. You could phrase it as like one thing that does puzzle me is this. It seems to me as an outsider that it would be better to go in and do it in this way. Maybe we could discuss it over lunch. I mean, like a general piece of advice that I have for everybody is find people that are a little older than you that have the job you want and meet them and become their friends. Right, so I have actually had some readers that have managed to avoid bad parts of school, and I have actually helped them through my blog. Like there was one student at Northwestern University, which is like the 10th best university in America, and he had finished all of his coursework, except the school wanted him to pay a full additional year to do a couple of other stupid classes. And so it's like, pay us $75,000 or we won't agree that you're a graduate. So anyway, I went and posted an email from him on my blog, and through him, there was actually a reader that worked at a finance firm that said, I'm interested, I like you, I'm interested in you, and he actually was able to get that job, which normally you would absolutely need a college degree for, through these connections. So just making friends. One of my slogans is friendship rules the world. If you can find friends that are in a position to go and help you, and of course, the best way to make friends like that is to convince them that you have, that you are someone that is helpful. So, I mean, I know that sounds hard. I mean, my friend who runs the startup, he says, look, it's really easy to go and get a good job without college. Just go and figure out a way to improve an existing business and then meet the people who run it and then tell them about it. And I say, yeah, that's why your customer base is limited, because most people don't have the initiative to look up someone else, a stranger on the internet. And you're asking them to do this incredible thing, but if you are a person like that, if you're someone who has that kind of initiative, then I think it's another good route. Yes? Oh.
Okay, so I was wondering whether education austerity can also be a panacea policy like housing regulation, because you said that, for example, housing regulation might impact, might increase fertility, right? And you wrote an article in which you said there's a correlation, right? Most people think that it's income that correlates with, but when you control for education, it seems like rich people who are uneducated have plenty of children.
Yes, that's for the truth for the United States. I don't know this is true for any other country.
Okay, but
yeah. Everyone knows whatever is true for America is true for all countries, right? Right. Let's just, but sure.
So could privatizing or spending less money on education just increase countries' fertility rate, or maybe is it just?
Yeah. So I do talk about it in the book. For the United States, I think there's very good evidence that you're right. For other countries, it's less clear, but definitely, but maybe. But yeah, like if you have to go and spend 8 years in school out of high school before you can get a real job, that discourages fertility, right? Because most people don't want to have kids until they're earning a good income, right? And there's multiple angles. First of all, it's hard to get married when you're still a student. And then it's also hard to have, even if you do get married when you're still a student, it's hard to go and feel comfortable having kids before. So it seems like it is another reasonable way to increase fertility. So here's the funny thing. There's actually a lot of researchers in economics who have done who try to get at least quasi-experimental data saying that more education leads to lower fertility, and then they say, isn't that great? Now, usually they're talking about poorer countries, but still I'd say, at least don't you need a philosophy class before you know whether it's better to have more people who are poorer or fewer people who are richer? To me, at least, it's a question that's worth talking about. Obviously, anytime a couple has a child, they have deliberately reduced their per capita income, right? Even if both parents keep their jobs, you're now dividing family income by 3 instead of 2. And it seems like that can be a good idea, right? So, my wife and I would have triple the per capita income that we have right now, if not for our kids. But we chose to have the kids instead. Yeah, but I think you're likely to be right. So yeah, great point. Let's see. Yes, please.
Yes. So thank you for your lecture. I have 2 questions. The first question is, what would you say that education has some positive externalities? I mean, we see in some data that education is correlated with some habits or health measures like obesity or some smoking and so on. So maybe this is the profits or benefits of education. And my second question is, what would you say that maybe the effect of education is non-linear? I mean that it works when, in case of some poor countries at the very beginning, I mean also in the literature about transformation of Poland from the communist to the market-based economy, more or less, we see, I mean, people often mention that one of Poland's results was the relatively high human capital because there was higher education under the communist regime compared to the pre-war level.
Okay, so 2 great questions. So on the positive externality, so actually in the book I go over every major positive externality that's ever been discussed. Sometimes there's not much data, or often there's only US data. But what we can say is that the evidence of the effect of education on happiness is very mixed. In particular, you don't want to double count. You don't want to say that if education increases income and income makes you happier, you don't want to give education credit for income and happiness because they are the same thing, really. But there's actually a number of papers saying that controlling for income, education reduces happiness. Think about a PhD who drives an Uber. How does a PhD who drives an Uber feel about his life? He probably feels worse than if he only went to high school, right? So on the case of health, this is one where there's a lot of papers on the effect of education on health. I spent a lot of time going through them. The ones that have a large effect normally do things that are very, they require very sophisticated statistics, because if you do obvious statistics, they don't work. They have to do very careful things that seem deliberately designed to get a high answer. If you just do it the normal way, then you usually get very little effect. On things like smoking, this one is philosophically interesting because, let's see, I'm guessing there's some smokers in this room, right? Just by the demographics of Poland, seems like there's probably some smokers here. All right, so now suppose that you get more education, suppose that you like smoking. I assume people who smoke like smoking, all right? And then education gets you to stop doing something you like. All right, is that clearly a benefit? It's not clear that it is, right? It requires a value judgment saying that the pleasure that you get from the smoking is less important than the health gain. And that's one where people sort of treat it like it's obvious, but I mean, look, there's a lot of other things. Like, I know an incredible way to stop all venereal disease. Just be a lifelong virgin, you'll never get a venereal disease. So imagine education gets people to be lifelong virgins. Yes. But it wipes out venereal disease, it's good for health, so that's a benefit. MIT actually famously, I think 3/4 of the students, undergraduates at MIT are virgins when they graduate. So anyway, I'd say, look, maybe that's true, but at minimum, I think that's a deep philosophical question. I mean, it would be one thing if education taught you a costless way to be healthy. Like if education just said, do something that is perfectly pleasant and it makes you live longer. Like, eat more potatoes and less, I don't know, less broccoli. Like eat more potatoes, less broccoli, and it's like, oh wow, I didn't like broccoli anyway. I eat more potatoes, I live longer. That would be like a true health gain where you don't have any suffering and you live longer. But if you have to give up something that you like in order to live longer, and education causes you to do that, then I say it doesn't really make sense to count that as a benefit unless you have some big philosophy, which I didn't want to do. I said, look, I talked about the effect of education on fertility. I said, look, I think this book is controversial enough without me answering the question, is human life worth living? Right? And my own view is yes, but I didn't want to have to argue it, or so. Now, then your other question. So what was your second question? Oh, yes, the nonlinear impact. So this is also one where in development economics, there has long been an idea that maybe the biggest gains are from primary education, less from secondary, and even less from tertiary education. But at least on global data, it's very hard to confirm that. There's just a lot of papers that get a lot of different results. Some papers actually find that tertiary is the best kind of education to have. This is complicated by the fact that there are some countries that spend a lot on education and yet the teachers don't show up. So the thing that seems to work really well is if we look at student test scores. So not education spending, not years of school, but the actual test scores of the students in those countries. That seems to be very, very predictive. But then the problem is, well, maybe there's something, maybe that's just a smarter country and was a smarter country before. And maybe it's not because of these other things. We see that there are countries that don't spend much on education, where their years of education are not that much, but their test scores are good. And we definitely see countries where they spend a lot and they spend a lot of years, but their test scores are terrible. That's actually, basically these days, that is most third world countries. Actually, they spend a lot on education, they spend a lot of years, but their test scores are still poor. Like Haiti right now has, the population is more educated by official measures than France was in 1960. Officially, they're spending a lot of time in school. So now if you were to say that, well, maybe the correct hypothesis is that good education has nonlinear benefits, it's like, well, then we have to have some non-circular way of measuring goodness of education. Or we say, okay, fine, but spending more on education isn't a way to make it good. It's something else. You could say, maybe communism makes education good. I don't want to say that. Right? I mean, let's see, my wife actually, got out of communist Romania when she was a little girl. At least the teachers were strict anyway. They had fingernail inspections. They see what, did you have these? They just see if your fingernails are dirty. No, this is only Romania. Okay. Yes, and yes, and they hit kids with rulers. So maybe that is a way to get a good workforce. I mean, it's confusing though because of course, the standard thing that everyone said about the whole Eastern Bloc workforce in the 1980s was, we pretend to work, you pretend to pay us. Right? You've heard that saying before, I assume? We pretend to work, you pretend to pay us. So then you'd have to have not just a nonlinear story. This is what I call a sleeper effect. This is where we give you a good education when you're a kid, and then you work under communism for 15 years and you don't do anything, and then communism falls, and then you start being a good worker. It's like, okay, I guess it's possible, but it's sort of a hard story, right? Now, I have a colleague who, he's an economic historian, and he says that the cause of modern European prosperity was the Catholic Church's ban on incest in 800 AD. And this is his whole life, and he really believes this theory. It's like it's all caused by incest, all incest, and I'm just like, it's hard to believe. But yes, but this is another example. It's a sleeper theory because in 800 AD, the Catholic Church bans incest, and then we wait 1,000 years, and then the Industrial Revolution happens because of the ban on incest. And we're like, why didn't the Industrial Revolution happen much earlier if it was just incest? And he's, Bryan. Let's see, other questions? Yes?
Yes, I have one. I've read in your book that there is no discernible effect of the education on the IQ or on the logical thinking.
On the IQ of?
On the IQ of the students. It's more genetical thing than the education process, so to speak. And my question is, is there any kind of research about like constant heightening, not only temporal one, but the heightening of the IQ by the study of mathematics? If we are simply teaching the students the maths, and does it have any kind of effect on those students?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So what I say is I don't actually say that education has no effect on IQ. What I say is that we can definitely find what, an effect of, if you teach if you teach IQ tests, for example, you can definitely raise scores in IQ tests. Right, so for example, if you just give someone a preparation class for an IQ test, you can get their scores up. We have classes on standardized tests, you can get scores up. And actually, even tests that are called IQ, often they do test the same material that's taught in school. The question is this an actual increase in human intelligence, or is it what they call a hollow effect? Right? Obviously, if you just gave someone all the answers for a test and then said, memorize these, you could do that. You can raise IQ enormously by that method, and no one would think that's a good thing to do. Right? Because it's basically, it's cheating. It's not really raising intelligence. It's just telling, A, B, C, D, B, C, right? And a person could memorize the answer to a test, but they're not really smarter. Right? So that is clearly hollow. And then one where it's just test preparation, that also seems quite hollow. And then when we have seen any kind of schooling producing large gains, it has been this very test preparation focused kind of education. It's basically kinds where you go and you teach them exactly the questions that they will be taught. They'll teach them more, so you might teach them 300 questions and they only need to know 50 questions, but still every question on the test is something they've been taught. So again, that doesn't seem like that's likely to be raising intelligence. And then the question is there anything else? And then my answer on that is, it's just hard to say. Most, the large gains in intelligence from IQ, or from large gains of intelligence from education, are definitely these hollow effects. And then the medium ones, at least also a lot of it's hollow. Maybe there's something a little bit left. So that's my general answer. Maybe there is some small effect, but most of it is the other way around. Most of it is that smart people stay in school longer. It's not that going to school makes you smarter.
It's a kind of bias.
Yes. Right now, again, but like I say, the evidence is a bit more complicated, and I don't want to overstate. But I will say that at least most of the effect of education on IQ seems to be this hollow effect, where I just go and teach you how to do IQ tests, and then you get better at IQ tests. And again, how can you know that an effect is hollow? One of the best ways is I teach you how to do one IQ test, and you improve a lot, and then I give you a different kind of IQ test, and you don't improve on that. Because I only trained you to get better at this one narrow kind of thing. And again, the whole idea of intelligence is supposed to be that it's broad, right? When you think about a smart person is someone who, if they set their minds to it, they can do just about anything. Do you have that expression? In the US, if someone's smart, if he put his mind to it, he could do anything. All right, now, of course not. You can't really do anything, but still. See, other questions? All right, my pleasure. I love you guys. I love Poland. Yes, Wrocław. This is my second time in Wrocław. Here's my sin. I didn't even know about Wrocław before I came. I didn't. I was an idiot American. I didn't know about it. I did know about Breslau, but I didn't know about Wrocław. I was like, oh, it's the same thing. Well, that's what I discovered when I was here. Oh, right. But anyway, you know about Breslau, right? Yes. Yes, you know you're in the historic city of Breslau. But, okay, so anyway, thanks a lot. And again, thanks to Mateusz for organizing it. Mateusz is a master organizer. Much appreciated.